Let the record clear.
Okay, today is May 5th, 2025. This is a regular assembly meeting of the Petersburg Borough. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Member Newman,
Here.
Member Valentine,
Here.
Member Marsh. Here. Mayor Jensen,
Here.
Member Staten Gregor,
Here.
Member Lynn,
Here.
Member Schwartz.
Here. Okay, it's now time for the voluntary pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, that brings us to item 3 on the agenda. I'd entertain a motion for approval of the minutes from our regular assembly meeting of April 21st, 2025.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to amend the agenda to move item 15E, the rate
This is
study.
actually, excuse me, Member Stan Gregor, this is approval of minutes.
Sorry.
Okay,
Okay,
so move.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we're on to today's agenda, amendment and approval of today's meeting agenda. Member Stan Gregor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move to amend the agenda to move item 15E, the rate study, to report of other officers, item 11C.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of that amendment, say aye. Aye. Okay, if there's no other amendments to today's agenda, I'd entertain a motion to approve as amended.
Moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we will move forward with that one change. There are no public hearings today. There are no bid awards. That brings us to item 7, which is persons to be heard on items on today's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to items on today's agenda? And one question, clerk, is there anyone zooming in other than the rate study?
No, there is no one.
Okay, thank you. State your name and who you represent.
Tom Abbott, representing KFSK Community Radio. Regarding the first reading of the FY26 budget, wanted to say thank you for the work that the staff put into it. And we appreciate being included in the budget with services that KFSK provides to the community and specifically to the borough. And so again, Jody and Steve and others, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for your input. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on items related to today's agenda? Seeing none, that brings us to item 8 on today's agenda, and that is persons to be heard on items that are not on today's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak? Just state your name, who you represent, and we have a 5-minute time limit.
My name is Brandon Allison, just representing myself. An issue that I wanted to bring up is just going to tell a quick story. Out at one of the lodges that we own out there, we have a septic tank that needs pumped and can't find anybody in town to do it. I contacted the borough about possibly using their services to do it and was told that since we don't pay taxes for those certain services that we're not allowed to use those. Now, I understand that. However, we also don't pay taxes for policing services, which is happening at Papke's right now. And so I was just wanting to, I don't know if I can ask questions of the board or not, or about how things are picked and chose about what you can use taxes for, what we can't use taxes for, what I'm paying taxes for, what I'm not. Because I feel as though the rule that has been put into place about parking at Papke's is not working. It's not correct. It's not how it should be. There's no time limit associated with anything like that. And just this morning, one of my boats, which was registered, was impounded or attempted to be impounded by a borough officer. Once I showed them that it was registered, they refused to take it back and put it where it was. They parked it on someone else's property and just left. And so on one hand, I'm being told that I don't pay taxes, so I can't use the borough services. But on the other hand, the borough services that I'm not paying taxes for are attempting to impound my boat. And so it's really frustrating. And I don't know where we go from here with something like that, but I wanted to bring it before you guys and see if there's something we can talk about. Or either if we are going to police PAPKs, make some rules that make sense, not just, if something's registered, it can be parked there, because I can go park 50 registered vehicles and trailers there to make my point, right? That's not a smart rule. Let's put a time limit on it. If we're gonna park, or if you're gonna police PAPKs, make it a 3-day time limit. Make it anything like that so that people aren't actually just abusing it. And then if we're gonna use the borough services for anything outside of Service 1, I think we should use all borough services, not pick and choose which ones we're gonna use. Because I don't think that that's fair. Because I have a septic tank out there right now that I need pumped, and I offered to provide transportation on a licensed and insured landing craft that can take the pump truck out there, and was told no because I don't pay taxes for that. And then the borough police services attempted to take my boat this morning. So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this to our attention. And as far as what services you would get from the taxes you do pay, I would suggest you maybe talking to the manager, the finance director, and, but as far as the policing and, why one and not the other is.
Yeah, I've talked to Steve a bit, and I understand, I can understand, hey, we're not going to take the borough pump truck out there because you're outside of that. But let's stick to that thing. If we're not going to use any of the borough services, let's not use the borough services. Like PAPK's is outside of Service Area 1, so we're not paying for police services out there. If anyone's going to police it, it should be the state troopers, not the Petersburg Police Department.
Thanks, Steve. Do you have any input on this, or?
I can. Yeah, on the Vector truck, as I explained to you, it's one of one, and can't risk that something bad would happen. And there's also a very long lead time on that. The Vector truck is part of our wastewater fund, rather than it doesn't have anything to do with taxes. It has to do with fees paid into the wastewater system. So that's why I said no on the, it's just too risky for us.
Right, but you did tell me on the phone that I paid taxes for only the school, not for
Correct.
not any of the borough services. So I don't pay taxes for the police services as well.
Correct, but we have a maintenance agreement with the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Alaska to manage the parking down there. They asked us to deal with it because they were getting complaints from people who live in the area, and we have a signed agreement for them. It's good for a year. It may or may not be renewed.
Right.
That's where that comes from.
Well, and again, my main point is I'm not disagreeing with policing PAPKs if that's what we're going to do, but like to prove a point, it's the rule just says you have to have something registered to be there, and if it's registered, you can leave it there. There's no time limit. However long you want, anybody who lives down the Narrows or anywhere else that uses PAPKs, as long as their car is registered, it can be there as long as they want. And so if we're going to police PAPKs and we don't want people to park there for an extended amount of time, let's make it a good rule. Let's not just, if it's registered, it can be there. And if I need to prove my point and move all of my boats and all of my vehicles and everything down there and take up the whole parking lot, then so be it. I'm not trying to be that way. However, I do feel like things are being pick and chose about what services can be used outside of Service Area 1s and which ones can't.
Okay, well, thank you for your testimony today, and I don't know where it will go from here. I guess if you wanted the assembly member put it on the agenda, we could have a more in-depth discussion or what direction we want to go or can go, so.
That'd be great, and I'd be happy to be a part of any of that.
Yeah, so, anyway, thank you.
Yep.
It's the first I've heard of it. Well, heard there was some activity out there today, but don't know the details. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on items not on today's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move forward. There are no board, commission, or committee reports. Nothing on the consent agenda. That brings us to item 11, report of other officers. The CEO of the Petersburg Medical Center sent in a written report, so that's in the agenda if anybody wants to see the details. And we have District Ranger Case will provide an update from the Forest Service. And then we'll move on to the agenda change.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. I have a few brief things to let everybody know about. So Thomas Bay contract, we're looking at that being advertised in June. That'll be a 5-year contract, which includes the harvest of young growth, timber, some road improvement, fish crossings, and parking improvements to Point Agassiz related to some water quality issues that are occurring out there. So just so that's on folks' radar, that is on its way to advertisement in June. So we're excited about that. Liz, I will be getting a hold of you. We're going to talk about Good Neighbor Authority related to borough, land, state, and how, what the ins and outs of that are with the Forest Service as well. That's something I'm learning a lot about and getting some experience in. So we're going to try to answer each other's questions, I think, on how that process works. We did lose our cabin crew lead. As you all know, we're undergoing some different staffing changes right now, but we are working out plans to make sure we're getting to our cabins, keeping up on them, prioritizing the ones that get the most use. But I just wanted to kind of put a plug out to everybody that if you see something with a cabin, please let us know. If we don't know about it, we can't make plans to go do something about it. And with our staffing situation right now, it's more important for us to have lead time so that we can staff those trips correctly and make sure we're getting out there. Our downtown office project is going great. Really kudos to the contractor. They're doing an excellent job. And currently we're ahead of schedule. We'll see if that continues. As you know, sometimes you run into things that take a little bit longer, but that project's going well. And I foresee that we should be getting in there next spring about this time, if not a little earlier. And then the last thing would be for anybody that's looking for firewood sales or small timber sales or micro sales, so standing dead and down trees. We are trying to get on a more of a cycle with our folks coming to us to put in their requests and us getting back to them so that they can go harvest their trees. So if folks are interested in that, June 1st is what we're requesting, so we can do any environmental review we need to do by August 15th. So just putting that plug out there to the public. And that's it.
Thank you for your report.
Yeah.
Are there any questions of District Ranger Case today? Okay, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we will get the report that was supposed to be later on in the agenda. Can't remember the gentleman's name, but you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ari with the client success team here at Waterworth. Nice to meet everyone. Okay, so thank you. So before I begin, I'm just going to provide some context into what Waterworth is. Essentially, we're a software platform that empowers local governments like Petersburg to achieve financial sustainability while balancing affordability. Now, through all my conversations with Carl, Chris, Jody, and everyone else as well, we know that this can be quite challenging, and all the other communities that I've been working with. But it can be done through the practice of what's called continuous revenue management, which at Waterworth is two things. One is keeping a live financial model up to date at all times, which you'll see today. And two is keeping you, our elected officials, informed on a continuous basis. So we can have these discussions and make those smart decisions quickly and efficiently. What you'll see today, I would think of them as results, not reports. And the team, they put a lot of hard work in here, and they have developed visualizations for the water, wastewater, electric, and sanitation funds' current trajectory for you to consider, discuss, and iterate upon. I do want to clarify that my role here today is not to advise you on what to do. At the end of the day, you are the experts of your community. I just want to facilitate the conversations around it and what the rest of the team are recommending should be the next actions. So I'm going to take a moment here just to pause if there are any initial questions about my introduction.
Questions from the assembly? I don't see any, so just carry on.
Awesome. Thank you. Just going to share my screen. All right. So what do we see in front of us? It's the home page for Waterworth, and we're currently in the water service area. You can see that on the top right, Petersburg Water, and this is the organization. all we see in front of us right now is some pretty colors, some graphs, great design, COSA, LFM. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with our long-term financial model, which is our LFM. And in that, I'm going to start with our baseline. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, this dashboard, before I start breaking it down, consists of 4 parts. And the first part is our revenue requirements. Then it has revenues themselves, the cash position, and the guidelines. And I'm going to break it out piece by piece and stack it up together. I do want to clarify, in terms of all the data that we have collected, we have basically taken all of the numbers and actuals that have been audited and also presented by the rest of the team from 23 all the way up to 25 and 26 budget. And you can see on the y-axis, that's the dollar amount, and the x-axis is the years. So after we gathered all of that information in terms of the actual and budget, we also had, with the help of Chris and Carl and everyone else, just giving us future projections in terms of projects, how we're going to be funding them, and so on. So you'll see some of that forecasting here today as well. So let's go ahead and start with our first part, which will be the revenue requirements for the water service area. We start off with the operating expenses, and you can see that it fluctuates, and you can see the graph from 23 to 25. It peaks at around 25, about $1 million. And then by 26, our budget somewhere around almost close to $1 million or $990,000. And then you notice that this just keeps increasing on a year-to-year basis. That's because in our model, we put a 3% inflation every year, which is why you start to see it right off and keep increasing in a linear fashion. So that's the operating expenses. That's in there. Now we're going to layer in our current debt service on top of it, which will be the current debt service right here. You can see the lighter blue of shade up here. And you can see in 2025, we're currently paying about $260,000 in debt, existing debt service. And then I'm going to layer in proposed debt service. That's from the future projects that Chris and I were discussing as well, like the Clearwell, Water Main, Sandy Beach, so on in the future. And you can start to see in 2029, it starts to pick up. And we have mapped all of those future debt services out in a lighter, even a lighter shade. And finally, we have the capital improvements, where I was talking about the Clearwell, Water Main, Sandy Beach, just listed out in front of us, just showcasing the mountainous terrain for all those capital expenses stacked on top of all the other expenses, operating and debt service. So in front of us, we're just seeing the revenue requirements. And this just helps us educate us for our budget, our future planning, while also moving to the second part, which is our revenues, which will be the sale of water service. And we've accounted for that 3% adjustment in 2026. And then we have the other operating revenue, the non-operating revenue, grants to pay for some of the projects. You can see it's coming in for 2025 to pay for 26. And then you have some borrowed funds to pay for some of those projects. Now, these aren't confirmed loans, but it's just a plan that we have in motion for those future projects, especially Sandy Beach and some other smaller projects. So these together show us a window of revenues and expenses just combined together in one plane. Those buildings are represented by our revenues, and in the back you have our capital expenses listed out as well. So one key tip, just to understand how the model works better, and it goes into our third part, is how the cash position moves. And before I layer it on, essentially, if those buildings are taller or shorter than our mountains, that's when we start to see our cash position take a dive. And in case of some years where, let's say in 2025, an influx of cash coming in, which is going to be spent in the next year, you'll start to see the cash position line increase. And that's what happens when I layer it on. You can see in 2025, it shoots up. And I do want to clarify something, that the the balances that you see there, those numbers, 3.1 million, is the opening cash balance. That's quite important to know the trajectory. So you can see that the opening cash balance with the current trajectory and the grant coming in by the end of the year is sitting at a $3.1 million for us. And this just allows us to understand our graphs a little bit better. And I could isolate it, as you've seen in the slides that I gave. You could see that if I just isolate our cash position while the revenues and expenses are in the background, you start to see our cash stabilize and then eventually start to drop lower and lower as the debt service starts climbing in, especially for some of those bigger projects later on. And we're seeing that by 2033 to 2034, we're in the black, hitting below our cash, below the zero mark. One thing to also clarify is the fourth part, which is our guidelines. And that comes down to our operating threshold that we have in here. And the operating threshold, which is this red dotted line that we see in front of us, is essentially how much we want to keep in reserves for any unexpected operating expenses, which is about 33% discussed with the team. And that's about 4 months of operating expenses that we want to keep aside. And this is another guideline. This helps us educate our understanding and tell us that I know that we're going to go below 2033 with the current plan, but you just have 3% increase and zeros following that you're going to go below zero by 2033. But the fact is by 2032, we're at risk because we're very close to the operating threshold, which means that if any unexpected costs do come in, we may have to borrow from another fund or reduce projects and take drastic measures. So that's why the operating threshold exists, to warn us of what's going on. Awesome. So those together make up our total forecast. And that's our complete model with just that 3% rate increase and zeros after that. And with all those capital expenses coming in, the 3% on an ongoing basis and so on. I'm going to pause here for a second. I know I just went through a lot there. Any questions?
Questions? Member Lynn?
Just a quick question for you. Go
Sir.
back with where you show the major additions or expenses we're going to have to add or change our facility there. Does your model show, as we keep adding those costs, because we're going to have to bond for them in one way or another, does your model show that as an accumulative over time? I guess I'm missing that along the way, which would also raise the rates.
Yes, sir. And I think you're referring to, let's say if we have, if you look at the projects right now, and we look at we're just comparing our capital projects with the external funding that's coming in to pay for that project at that particular point of time. You could see that in 2025, we receive a grant that's used to pay for the Clearwell, $2.2 million or 1.95 million. Then you have the water main and so on. And the remainder, when they cancel each other out, as in we get the funding, we spend it, the remainder, at least for the loans, is the debt service that follows. The current debt service is always something that we're paying off. But after those loans are taken out, you can see the debt service start to come in, which again informs the decision about how we're going to be tackling our rates, because those are additional expenses we have to pay every year and accumulates, right? As you borrow more. You can see that the accumulation starts to pick up as we borrow for more projects. Does that help, sir?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. If there aren't any more questions, shall I proceed with the scenario? It's quite simple.
I see no more questions at this
Awesome.
time.
And one of the scenarios that you have also is essentially how our cash, because currently if you look at our cash, it's going below by 2032. But if you just take a more proactive approach to help us stabilize our cash for the long run, especially after all that debt service that's coming in, one of the scenarios that we have is perhaps having a 3% just carry forward every year. That And that's a scenario that we're seeing in front of us where the cash is definitely, you can see that later on it's going below the operating threshold by 2035, but it gives us a few more years when you have a bit more ongoing 3% increases every year. Now, some might argue that maybe you want to go for a higher percent increase, but that's where we come in and inform those decisions. But this is just one of the scenarios where if I go to step 7, this is just highlighting a few of these things, which is our cash position, our operating threshold, and the revenues that we bring in. You can see that I have put 3% every year beyond 2026, just to forecast in the future, not fixed numbers, just as a potential idea. And you can see that this allows us to have more cash available up until 2035. Now, with the current assumptions. Now, if I were to just delay pushing any increases, let's say if I made it 0 up until 2032, if I started 3%, the effect wouldn't be as much. You see that, how the graph barely moved over there? That's if I waited a long time. Now, if I, let's say, do 2029, you can see it starts to improve. And the more frequent it is, or rather the smaller and just keeping it 3% allows us to prolong our cash. Now, that's super helpful in making those decisions. Any thoughts on that? Would you like me to try another scenario?
They're good. You can move forward.
Okay, perfect. All right. So if we're good with this particular scenario, I would say that I'm going to move on to the wastewater side. I would say that if, let's say, we had 4%, and this will be very evident in the next service here as well, is that if you just start playing around with these numbers and maybe have 4%, 3.5, you can start seeing how the cash reacts to it, essentially. Like, for example, we can see that if a 4.5 is maintained with the current assumptions for the water service area, you can start to see it stabilize a lot more. But we'll get into those discussions at a later stage as well. Awesome. Okay, before I move on to wastewater, is Chris there? Would Chris like to add anything? For
He
the
is
water?
here. Do you have anything to add, Director Cotter?
Only one comment for the assembly, just that we have currently in our code a 3% increase for the water department for FY '26. That was part of a series of rate increases that were put into the ordinance the last time we did a rate study. And beyond FY '26, there is currently nothing else in the code. So we are gonna have a 3% increase this coming budget, just because that's already been established. But what we do moving forward from there has not been determined yet. Ariana showed you what it looks like if we keep going with those 3% increases, but I haven't decided whether or not to put that in the ordinance yet at this point. And so if, you know, if the assembly has any thoughts on that, I'll let you guys share those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cotter. Member Marsh?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So if we are looking at a 3% rate increase for the next 10 years, I'm wondering if that is actually going to be sufficient, i.e. something breaks, something unforeseen happens, you know, who knows what. But that's just the baseline increase that we're looking at. Is that correct? So potentially we could be facing a higher rate increase?
Potentially, or potentially could be a little lower. You know, this is, rate setting is kind of like budgeting. It's part of budgeting. It's just a guess. It's an educated guess about what you might need moving out, you know, into the future. So 3% would seem prudent based on the number of capital projects we have coming up and just general inflation, just to try and get ahead of the curve so that we don't eventually fall below our desired cash balance. But you know, you could go, I guess, either way with this one. The water department doesn't have quite the level of capital needs or upcoming operational needs as say the wastewater department does. So I think there's a little bit of latitude in this particular department to you know, go a little less or a little more, and I don't think we're going to end up in a bind, you know, barring something unforeseen, which you know, that's just is what it is. You know, there are surprises sometimes, but not always, and so this 3% annual is our best guess right now as to what will keep the fund healthy and stable moving forward with the capital improvements that we have on our list right now.
So, Member Lynn.
Let me follow up to Member Marsh's question. So what I'm hearing you say, Chris, is that with the projects that you see coming up and the needs for improvements and so forth, that a 3% is a reasonable increase in order to keep things, you know, fairly, I would say fairly even, and keep projects on lot.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it's a good compromise. I think it essentially keeps pace with general inflation, but it also allows us to absorb a little bit of debt service coming online, you know, and get out quite a few years before we are seeing, you know, any significant decrease in our cash below what we want to keep on hand.
So in this model that we generated that, you know, estimates we need 3% for, looks like forever, basically. Does that take into account what, I mean, the grants that we're trying to get for the big projects like the Sandy Beach water line, or, I mean, if we don't get those grants, the increase would probably change, wouldn't it? I mean, are the grants factored into this 3%?
Well, the grant for the Clearwell is, and I think a lot of the other projects, it is assumed that we will be getting mostly loan funding. Although it's possible we could get some larger grants, and that would reduce the pressure on the fund. Yep.
Well, if there's no other questions, I guess we'll move on. Any other questions?
Wastewater?
Awesome.
Wastewater, yeah.
Let's go. Okay. So it's a similar drill. I'm just gonna break it down again for the baseline master first for wastewater, and then proceed with the scenario. Okay. So currently in our baseline, you could see that we have the same graph. We're in wastewater now, and there are 4 parts, the same parts, different capital projects, different operating expenses, obviously. So part number 1, again, starting with our revenue requirements. You can again see that we have it from 2022. You can start with 2023, either one. And from there, we have up until 2026 in terms of data. And then again, the 3% inflation that we just kept as a general point, which is why you start to see the increases take place. Next, we have the current debt service and the existing loans and payments that we have. And you can see that it's quite steady for all the years, even beyond, let's say, 2036, 2037. And finally, we had the large portion of why we're here as well is because of the incline in terms of our debt service, especially the proposed that starts from 2026 onwards, where it starts at $200,000 to be paid and $150,000 for current debt service. And then by 2030, it rises to 500 or 440 for the proposed. And then after some of the bigger projects, it's the wastewater treatment plant disinfection. That's when we start to see $1 million for debt service coming in. Now it's possible to get a grant and we have explored the different scenarios, but in this particular baseline, we have it as a loan, which is why you start to see a real increase in our debt service amounts for the future. And on top of that, we just have a capital improvement. And you can see how the debt service correlates with our capital improvement, especially the $10 million that's coming in. And some of our bigger projects, the pump station replacements coming up, or is being conducted right now. Again, these all make up our revenue requirements, which includes operating, debt service, and capital improvements. Next, I'm going to do the same drill where you're going to be merging your cash or rather revenues that are generated from the rates. So if I put the sale of sewer service, other operating revenue, developer contributions, if any, non-operating revenue grants, some grants that are coming in, and then we have some of the big borrower funds that really help pay for some of those bigger projects. Before I even, let's say, put over our borrower funds and so on, you can clearly see, based on the math that we had in the previous, in the water model, there are gaps that exist where those mountains are much taller than our buildings. And that's when you start to notice, okay, there are funding gaps that exist, especially in the out years where our debt service starts really increasing, and especially after 2030. With all of that taken under account, we layer in the cash position and you start to see that decline occur. Especially it stabilizes until 2027, and then by 2028, 2029, we're in the black. And this is to be noted, it is before 2030 even takes place, before we have that big project. So before we have, let's say, $1 million in 2031 that to pay in proposed debt service, even before that point, we are below zero. That's a key point to note. And if I isolate it, look at our cash position, you can start to see that as the debt service keeps coming in, our cash keeps lowering down and it goes below the same operating threshold, which again is 4 months of operating expenses by the time we reach about 2027. And that's when you start using our emergency reserves to pay for all of our expenses. And by 28, we're below. I'm just going to revert it back to the total forecast. I'm going to wait a moment as well if there are any questions about the baseline itself.
Questions?
Are we all good?
Yeah, sorry, I had my
Yeah, no
microphone.
worries. It's very hard to see everyone, so I just wanted to give everyone time. I know this is all the new information, right? So
Lot to digest, but it's,
yeah, exactly. So you can take a minute. It's okay.
but I don't see any questions, so are we moving on to the proposed
Scenario?
solution? Proposed
Yes.
solution?
Yes, sir. All right. So now to combat that, we essentially started talking about, okay, let's perhaps try to adjust our rates to at least make sure that we could smoothen our curve. And just looking at the cash position itself, you can start to see that it at least stays up beyond 2029. There are still some scenarios to think about what the future looks like in terms of our rate adjustments. But to help us stay afloat and build above the operating threshold beyond 2028, 2029, not go below zero, the proposal was an across the board 25% increase for 2026, and then followed by some 10% for about 4 years. And then we have a 0% for 2031. That is subject to change. It depends on what our situation is, right? We always like to keep you informed so things can change. Maybe we get a grant for the project or for the wastewater treatment plant, and that could change how we're projecting in the future. So with all those considerations, at least to keep us sustainable up until 2030, this is the approach that the team has decided to go for.
So the 25% proposed rate increase for 2026, does that, for the wastewater, is that in correlation with the new requirements we're gonna have to meet? Is that gonna be part of that 25% gonna be hiring another employee at wastewater? Just kind of curious whether.
Yes. That is, the 25% figure is what we arrived at, basically just to balance the budget for the next year. And as part of a series of rate increases that we know are gonna have to take place. I originally, and perhaps the manager has talked with the assembly about this, I originally proposed a 40% increase. But after looking into the debt service schedule for our Pump Station 4 project, I realized that we could probably put off repayment of that first installment until 2027, and that's probably how that's gonna fall. So I backed that out of the budget and was able to reduce the proposed increase down to 25% and still balance. And that is essentially, the bulk of that number is for the additional staff person that is required to support all the additional testing. Some of that number also involves the cost of additional testing, which some of the tests are quite expensive. I think one that I'm thinking of, just one series of tests is like $24,000. So you're talking about big adds to the budget for this testing that is being required by our new discharge permit. Some of that number is also buying some lab equipment to support some of the testing that we can do here as opposed to having to send out for it. So all of that is rolled into our budget and is part of that 25% increase that we're proposing for FY '26.
Through the mayor. Chris, is it accurate for me to say that these rate increases do not include the capital costs of changes to the wastewater plant at this time?
Yes, that's right. We don't know really what's gonna happen with that disinfection project. You know, there's all kinds of rumors flying around that, well, maybe we won't have to do it. I think the odds of that are pretty low, just because we would not only have to remove the fact that the feds are pushing on this, but the state is actually pushing harder for it than the federal government. So we've got both the state and the feds telling us that we're gonna have to disinfect, which depending on where the numbers eventually land, we're thinking is probably a $10 to $12 million project. But we haven't really built that into the rate increase that we're proposing for this year. This year's is just to support the things that we know are coming online, you know, in the immediate future. And, you know, moving forward, we're proposing 10% for a few years after that. You know, that's our, kind of going back to what I said before, that's our best guess right now about how to keep things solvent and keep above the cash minimum that we want to have in reserve, while still being able to undertake some of these capital projects that we know, the big projects that we know need to be done, like Pump Station 4, like Pump Station 3, those things that regardless of what happens with disinfection, we know we've got aging infrastructure that has to be dealt with. So this next series of rate increases is really more about supporting that stuff and supporting the testing requirements that are coming into play. And the disinfection project is a big piece that's still a little bit of an unknown, whether we'll get grant funding, are we gonna have to loan for it, how that's all gonna come into and how that's all going to affect our budget moving forward. The great thing about this Waterworth software is that it's a rate engine and it's a live thing. I know Ari mentioned this earlier, but what we've done in the past for many decades is we tend to do a rate study every 5 years or so, and we make a bunch of assumptions, and then we put those rates into place, and then those rates are put into the code, and that's what happens. Well, you know, a lot of things can change in 5 years. And what's great about this software is as things change, we can plug in those changes, and that will allow us to modify our projections accordingly. So we can, you know, and I guess there's a choice to be made there too. We can do what's been done in the past where we project out 4 or 5 years and put that into the code. Or we could do it more like, you know, what I do with motor pool, which is an annual thing. You know, I evaluate motor pool each year to see what our rate should be and our labor rate, that is. And so with a rate engine like this, you know, you're not locked into that traditional model of having to basically make a forecast out 5 years and stick with it. This is a much more nimble platform where, you know, as things, well, maybe we have to delay a project a couple years. Well, you can plug that into the model and you get feedback right away on how that changes your numbers and your requirements for revenue and so forth. Anyway, sorry, I digressed a little there, but I just wanted to let the assembly know that it's a different animal than the type of rate studies we've done in the past, and I think it's a lot, you know, it's a lot more useful in the shorter term, and moving forward as things change, it allows us to react a lot more quickly than the traditional rate study process.
Ms. Brooke, and then.
Chris, could you quickly handle what's the status on the permit? I mean, when does it need to be in place? When do we need to put certain aspects of it in place?
Well, that is kind of a question mark right now. We're under the assumption that it would be, you know, first it would be this spring, then it was, you know, later this year. We right now do not know exactly the date when these requirements will come into play. Our new permit is sort of, I don't want to say hung up, but right now we're not getting a whole lot of answers from our permit writer on when we'll get these requirements in hand because of this issue with our outfall. And that has kind of caused some confusion about, okay, well, what, you know, what does that outfall need to look like now that we know more about it and we know more about where it's broken and the types of diffusers that are present on it? Do we want to put it back the way it was? Do we want to do something different? And the reason that's important is because a lot of these new requirements come from the mixing zone, that where we discharge out into the sound. You know, our old mixing zone was much larger than what the new one is proposed to be. And with the break in the outfall, that's caused some, you know, uncertainty in, well, what, you know, are they going to issue the permit based on the current condition of the outfall, which probably wouldn't be a good idea because our mixing zone would be so small that it would be basically impossible to, you know, comply with the type of testing requirements that they're talking about. So there's some uncertainty as to when these requirements are actually going to come into play. And part of that is just that we're not getting a lot of communication right now from the feds. And but they have indicated that our permit will be delayed, but they don't know by how much.
Follow up. So should we be then holding off on these changes and until we know? As far as the number of lab work and hiring the extra employee?
That was gonna be my question as well.
Yeah. I mean, we could budget for it, but not hire. I mean, I'm just throwing out stuff. I mean, it's,
Well, yeah, I know what you're saying, and I wouldn't, I guess that wouldn't be my recommendation, just because of what we've seen with these agencies in the past, excuse me, is that you might think they're asleep for a while, and then they'll all of a sudden say, wait a minute, why didn't you do this? That, you know, that, I don't know if the assembly's aware of the water tank bypass issue. I know the mayor got an email about it not too long ago, but DEC has been pushing on that issue for us to correct this potential cross connection in our water tank facility. And they bugged Carl about it for years, and then they stopped asking us to fix it for a while. And then back in, I don't know, it was November, December, we got a really unfriendly email from them saying, well, why haven't you done this? And it was, well, we didn't know, we didn't know that it was really an important thing. But so they'll come around, after a period of inactivity, and they'll all of a sudden hit you with something and hold fines out there. And so I like to be ahead of that curve if we can. But, maybe we could put this off for a few months and see what happens with this outfall repair. The issue with that would be, we might have to come back with a supplemental budget, a rather large supplemental budget, to try and get all the funding mechanism into place to support all of these things that we know are coming along with the new permit. And, some other communities have already received their permits. So I think it's unlikely that we're going to get out of these requirements in the longer term, given the fact that other communities are already facing, the need to increase their testing and so forth. So yeah, my recommendation will be to proceed as we have budgeted and begin getting these things into place. Some of them take time as well. The purchasing of equipment, the hiring of a person, and the training of a person takes quite a while. So it's better if we get ahead of that a little bit and get someone in place and are ready to accommodate all of these things when they do become active.
Berlin?
Yeah, I have two questions for you. The first one is the skills that you're looking for this test, if we're hiring a person for testing. What you're looking for or asking for, are those skills readily available, or are we talking a limited pool that we'd have to draw from?
Well, I think they're skills that we can train somebody to do. Basically, we are proposing just adding another operator position, and we feel like it's more of a manpower issue, if you will, versus a special training issue. It's the type of thing we already do. There's just so much more of it that we need another person to help us accommodate all that. And while I'm talking about adding personnel to wastewater, we should kind of go, I guess, into the history of that department a little bit more. We've never been overstaffed in wastewater, and a few years ago, we had to add a very labor-intensive process. We used to be able to dump our wastewater sludge at the landfill, and DEC discontinued letting us do that several years ago, and we had to go to a composting process. That composting process is very labor intensive, and we've had to add plant infrastructure. The personnel basically took on all that extra work. We didn't hire any additional staff to help support that process. So they are very stretched thin as far as what they are already doing with the staff they have. So, you know, really, we probably could have justified adding some more staff time prior to now. But with all of this new testing that's coming into play, there's just no question that we need to add another full-time person there.
My second question for you is, since this is interactive software, did you play with, rather than to look at such a drastic rise, you know, fourth rise, did you look at ratcheting it up rather than just making one great big increase, you know, at one time and doing something in that respect?
Yeah, we plugged in quite a few different scenarios, and we looked at basically front loading it all into one really large increase. We looked at spreading it out, and the reason I landed on that scenario that we've been looking at today is just that I kind of use that first rate increase is just what do we need to do with the additional staff and testing that's coming online? What do we need to do to balance the budget this year and not go in the hole? And so that's where the 25% came from. And then the 10% are just to keep that cash line, you know, where we want it and not go negative out a few more years. But, you know, again, with this model though, we don't really have to predict that far out in the future if we don't want to. And we can look at what do we need to do to balance this year's budget, and then we can come back and look at it next year if that's, you know, if that is what the manager and the assembly decide they want to do. This is one way to satisfy the, you know, the budgetary requirements of the department, but there are other ways. We could look at, you know, maybe running a little bit of a deficit budget this year with a lower rate increase. Maybe we go 15%, and maybe we have 15 next year and 15 the year after. You know, we could do something like that and try and get that number down and spread it out a different way. And that's the great thing about this rate engine is that you can plug it in all sorts of different ways. Ariane can, he's really good with these graphs and spreadsheets. So, yeah, it's all just how you want to solve the puzzle, you know, and what I've proposed here is just one way to do it. There's other ways we could get to the same goal.
Thank you.
So it looks like he tweaked the numbers on the rate increase per the years and with the 15% like Chris just mentioned. And before, I think by 2032, we were going to be in the red. And now it looks like
By 2030.
2029 and change. But, so I don't know what the difference is, but the hard part for me is not knowing when we're going to be told you have to meet this requirement to spend, you know, to raise the rates this much. That's, you know, the tough decision to make if you don't have all the data, you know, all the information. So anyway, any other questions, or is everybody else getting numb in the brain with numbers like that?
If I could, Mr. Mayor, just want to say this publicly. We have at this point, we have no intention of trying to borrow the money for the capital costs. It may come to that, but reality is we've made it clear to our federal delegation, we need help. And we'll continue to make that case. It's become our #1 project. And it's, you know, I've already spoken to Murkowski's office and to Beggage's office both about funding this. So it's got their attention. Doesn't mean that we'll get the money, but at least it's on their radar screen. And we're going to keep pushing on that as from a standpoint to avoid massive increases that would be associated with the capital cost if we had to go that way.
You have to add capital cost into the rate increase. It looks like, I mean, it'd be, I don't know what the percentage would be. I mean, you know.
Very large.
uh,
Anyway, I just want to say, I mean, that we're not ignoring that. It's gotta, we want it to be a grant.
Okay, where are we at on the wastewater discussion here?
Yeah, I would just like to add as well, part of the scenario exploration phase, besides the numbers for the next 5 years, Chris and I also explored, alongside the rest of the team, about different scenarios. We're talking about the 2030 project. We also accounted, let's say if we get a full grant funding of $10 million for 2030, and you can see that the rates still again 25, 10, 10, but maybe you don't have to have another 10%, maybe 10% in 2030 instead of 10% in 2030, you can drop it down to 4, 3, 2, 1. So the grant definitely does help beyond 2030, but up until that point, we definitely need to do something. So I just wanted to hammer that point home.
So basically the 25% increase, I might have already asked this, in 2026 is to hire more staff to do the testing and to, you know, it sounds like we're understaffed already, but with not knowing when we're gonna have to meet these requirements.
Yes, that is correct.
Correct assumption?
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, where are we at?
Yeah, I think we're almost concluding the wastewater. In this case, I would like to ask Chris, would you like me to show the rate cards and just the average bill, or should I move on to electric? What do you think, sir?
Yeah, actually, I think it would be helpful to show the assembly that calculation we did on what the average, when we calculated the average residential bill, which is based on 4,000 gallons of water and wastewater use. If we raised the rates 25%, what the bottom line would be for the average residential user.
That would be good to know. I see it on.
The change is just the difference between the current and proposed bill in terms of dollars.
So 1251.
Yeah.
Per month would be the average impact to the average bill.
So at 25%, it'd go up about $13, $12.50. Okay.
Yep.
Marsh.
Thank you. So I do know that there are folks in town who would love to find a way to reduce their water, wastewater, sewer consumption. There's no way around it at this proposal. I mean, how would a resident lower the utility costs related to this?
Well, there are ways to try and save water usage. You know, if you can make sure you have water saver attachments on your faucets, shower heads, and things like that.
I think my point is for those who are on fixed incomes and cannot do that, they don't even have the means to do that, that this 25% doesn't seem like a lot, but for those who are on fixed incomes, this is going to be tough, and especially if it's a 10% increase for the next 5 years, that's 65%.
Yeah.
And that's a lot for a lot of people.
Well, for certain folks, it wouldn't be quite as difficult. There is a senior citizen hardship rate that would help some folks out, but yeah.
Is that an application thing? I mean, how would one go about finding that?
I think Director Tao might be able to elaborate on that a little bit.
There is a form that you fill out. Not very many people can get it. It's a really low income, below 20,000 a year. So there's probably like 10 people that have it right now. Yeah.
Is there a resource that maybe people in the community that you can guide them to for best practices to help lower, oh, hey, maybe I don't need to do this, maybe I don't need to do this, help lower that bill? Is there like a resource out there?
I don't know that we have a link to anything like that, but there's certainly a lot of stuff like that out there on the web. We could,
Then,
I-
you know, make the recommendation so then people around town can then read it and then maybe in turn, as these rates increase, our practices get better as well, the community's practices, so. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you can see it's gonna go up like $13 a month or whatever for a 4,000 gallon user. Is that what the number is based on?
yes.
So if there's no more questions about the wastewater rate study presentation, are we gonna move on to electrical department?
We have an electrical one.
Awesome. Okay. So the same, it's gonna be the same drill again, the baseline master. And this time it's gonna be a bit longer in the sense that when we see our rate adjustments this time, it also includes restructuring of some of our rates. So I'll expand on that a bit later as well. Excuse me. So again, this is the baseline master for the electric utility, and it has 4 parts. We have our operating expenses from 21 to 25, 26. We have all of our budgets in there as well and actuals, and then the 3% inflation that goes beyond that point. We have a contracted services, purchase power, current debt service, proposed debt service. You can start to see it later on. It's not as much as, again, compared to what the wastewater is, but it's sizable for the community. And then we have our capital improvements, some of those bigger projects, and this expansion projects as well that are a bit of darker green. You can almost treat them as just capital expenses, I would say. These all together make up our revenue requirements. They include the hydro, the standby diesel, Scarrow Bay, penstock replacement, and so on. That's why you see those 3 peaks and 4 peaks show up. So once we've established our revenue requirements for every single year with those capital projects also layered in, we can then move on to our revenues. The first one is generated from our rates, the sale of service. I would say since we're so used to this particular graph, you can start to see that the sale of service is able to cover almost all, if not most of the expenses moving forward, as well as the operating expense and purchase power. But that's when we need the help of our other operating expenses, developer contributions, non-operating revenue, grants, and borrowed funds to pay for some of those bigger projects as well. I would say that we have made the assumption in this one as well that we have a 4% in for 2026 in this base model. And then just layering in the third part, which is our cash position. You can clearly see that we'll get an influx of cash. It's predicted that we'll get an influx of cash in 2022. Then we've been spending that in 23 and 24. And then there's also some small funding gaps that will show up after 2025 as well, which is why you see the cash position shoot up in 2022 and then start to slowly trend downwards up until 2032 to 2033, where the cash is below 0. If I isolate the cash position and then layer also the operating threshold, even though our cash goes below the operating or below 0 by 2032, it goes below our operating threshold by 2029 and 2030. That's when we're a bit in the danger zone because you're using our reserves to pay off for just operating, and nothing's getting left behind for emergency supplies if need be. So that's the caveat to the electric model right now. I'm gonna zoom back out. So this is the total forecast together. Give you a second just to look at all of them again. Okay. Is there any part that you would like me to re-explain in this particular baseline? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we've got the cash position spiking in 2022 and where it finally drops to below zero at between 22 or 32 and 33. If the cash position is zero, what's the forecast? I mean, I know in my budget, if I was looking at zero cash, there would be a problem and I would need to take some very serious corrective steps. So are these rate increases going to, it only looks like it's kicking the can down the road with the rate increases before we're again at zero with the cash?
Yes, and this is because it's the baseline. It's without any readjustments beyond 2026. I basically put zero, and then after this, I'll show you the scenario where we will stay above zero. That's
And wouldn't the cash flow there not come back up when we get that grant in 2026? Right? Shouldn't there be another, right? You see that?
great question, sir. And what you can see over there is, let's say if I look at capital expansion and improvements and I get the grant that comes in, you can see that there's a gap that exists between, because there are some other projects as well. So we get a grant for one of our projects, but there are some other projects that also utilize our reserves, which is why the net effect is a deficit in our budget or our actuals.
So with no increase, we're gonna lose it by 2029, well, with the operating threshold, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the whole goal of what we're doing here is trying to stay above the red dotted line, which I'll show you in the next scenario, where we'll try to plan for the future, make sure that we don't go below the red operating threshold or below zero. And that'll be the forecast. Any questions about the baseline?
Questions from the assembly? So I'm guessing we're going to be looking at proposed rate increases.
Yes, sir. And it's also a bit of the structure as well, which is going to kick in. So for example, in this model, keeping everything else the same for the most part, you can start to see I layer all of the revenue requirements, proposed debt service, capital improvements. These all make up our revenue requirements, the same as the model that we saw. It's just that now you start to see, you could see the incline take place in our rate revenues clearly. And that's when you start to see that our cash position with this particular scenario looks healthier. It stays afloat and stays above the red dotted line at all times. So if I, let's say, isolate.
And the cash position target, that's just the recommended, what we should be at there?
Sir, in this example, that's a great catch. I was gonna talk about it right now, is that the cash position target is just something that we keep a small buffer for, where what the idealistic window is where we stay above the red dotted line at all times and then move alongside this black dotted line. It's an arbitrary number that can be changed at any time, depends on what our targets are, what our future goals are. But it's just to tell us that, okay, we're going to stay above the red dotted line, stay close to the black dotted line. As long as we achieve that, we're doing well. And what I would say is, just to add an additional point, is that the buffer that you see between 0 to the operating threshold is for unexpected operating expenses. And the buffer that we see between the red dotted line and the black dotted line is for capital expenses, could be overages or any unexpected accidents, incidents, so on.
What is the sales increase then? Percentage wise?
The sales increase, and I will get to how we structure the rates itself. But I would just say that look at these numbers in this case as increases in revenue, the overall increase in revenue, because sitting at around 4% for 2026, and then 3.5, and then 3 beyond that stage. And they are subject to change, but that was a combination that helped stabilize the cash in the future.
So, do we have more slides, or are there any other questions from the assembly members?
So we actually do have more. So in this case, after we set this aside, we said, okay, 4%, 3.5, 3%. Carl, Sarah, and I went and looked at the rates. And I'll skip a few sections. It's can get quite complex at times. And what I would say is that after we onboarded our consumption data for 2024, we started looking at maybe resetting the rates and maybe going to more of a uniform variable rate. So for example, if I go to rate design, you could see that if I go to step 3.4, and I'll get to the actual rates themselves, something that we notice right off the bat is we have residential, large commercial, general service, harbor, lights, and muni in there. And those are just different customer classes. And the light blue bar that we see on the left is our electric consumption from the whole system as a percentage. And you could see that it says 4271. I know it's a bit small. I can zoom in a little bit. And you see that's 4271. And compared to its billed revenue contribution, which is sitting at 4114. So, and each one of these bars have a different percentage in there. What this is just telling us is that in this case, electric residential users are just consuming slightly higher than how much they're giving back to the system. It can be a multitude of factors, but this is just a good way to compare each customer class's consumption with their billed revenue contribution.
So you would want to see the, I guess, is that black or dark blue?
Dark blue or black, either one.
You'd want to see that more even. So like if what you're saying is resident is using more than what they're paying, large commercial is using less than what they're paying, general service is about the same with harbor and so on?
Yes, sir. And that's the goal, but it depends on if you're intentional with it or not. Sometimes that disparity exists because we're spending a bit more on a particular customer classes. For example, some other communities spend a lot on residential users. Hence, they see the revenue contribution much higher than the consumption. So it depends on a multitude of factors. And the reason for this is just to show you that it's quite even, I would say, compared to all the other communities I'm working with, especially for the larger users, residential, large commercial, and general service. Harbor and munis have a bit of disparities, but it's not too significant. All right. So I'm just going to move forward with some of the proposals, and I'm just going to use a slide that we have created just so that everyone stays on. Right here. So you can see that in front of us, we have the current rate details, just listed out all the rate structures. You can see that lights is hidden. I just wanted to focus on the larger customer classes for now. And you have customer charges, residential energy, general service, large commercial energy, harbor, muni, and so on, and the demand charge as well. Going to give everyone a second. These are what our current rates are. You can also see it's broken out into customer classes, tiers, amount per kilowatt hour, and so on. What Carl, Sarah, and I were discussing was perhaps to make our rate schedule much simpler while also protecting smaller end users, which is making it simpler by having one uniform rate in terms of our variable charges, consumption charges. The large demand commercial charge stays the same. And we have a slightly increase to meet that 4% increase in total revenue, increase in base charges as well. Page 15.
So in the proposal, we're taking away the reduced kilowatt hour charge if you use over 500 kilowatt hours. That's just going to be so many cents per kilowatt hour. Carl?
Yes, that's correct. And one of the reasons, this is a much simpler rate schedule. Not many other utilities use that declining block rate that we have in place right now. That type of declining block rate is to promote sales of power when you have plentiful power. Well, we're in a situation where we're turning the corner on that. The SEPA is reaching the maximum that they can produce in the wintertime without us running diesel. So this type of rate design actually promotes conservation, which is what the utility really needs right now. So it's simpler to understand, but it also promotes conservation.
Valentine?
So then the proposed rates, then, does that correlate with the other slide where it was like the 4% increase, 3% increase, and so that kind of is factored into that other graph that we saw?
It is, but it's not apples and apples. So the 4% is a revenue requirement, is an overall revenue requirement. How these rates affect each bill is dramatically impacted by how much each customer class and each business or resident uses, how much they consume. It's very hard to compare apples and apples coming from the situation we were in to what we're proposing.
So then on the next slide where it says the proposed projected revenue contributions, large commercial doesn't change. So things aren't really changing that much except for maybe a little bit in residential. That's kind of what I'm seeing here, municipality and harbor.
That's correct. We really did not want the graph that's on the screen right now to change dramatically. We wanted each customer class to pay for what they're consuming. And this rate structure does that.
So in this study with the current rate and proposed rate, have you figured out roughly what it would cost per household?
We have looked into that. That's not in this presentation, but we will bring that forward when the rate ordinance is presented to the assembly. It's very interesting. I'll tell you, lower consumption residential users will see a reasonable increase. Higher using residential customers will see a higher percentage. Small businesses that don't use a lot of power actually will see a rate decrease, a billing decrease. It's very interesting how the singular energy charge affected bills, but we'll bring that forward.
Carl, I think we have comparisons in here. Sorry, sir.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Show them that. All right.
We have an assembly member. We have an assembly member with a question.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, so this consumption compared to revenues with proposed rates page
16.
is residential. So it's more based on averages rather than actual consumption? Safe.
This is the entire customer class altogether. So this isn't looking at one customer in each customer class. It's looking at every.
So all residential customers will have a base service rate plus their consumption. Okay, thank you.
As they do now, it'll just be a different look.
Schwartz?
Well, this is going back a little ways, but I'm looking at the total forecast and the capital expansion. Of course, you don't have a crystal ball to look into the future past 2032, but I don't see any green mountains after 2032 on the graph. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. We've done, a very large project. We've completely refurbished our hydro plant. We are in the process of, establishing the next increment of our diesel power right now. One of the big projects is even the next diesel generator, Scout Bay number 3. And then the largest project at the very end of the list is, replacing our penstock. Not that there aren't other projects to do in Power and Light, but those are by far the largest. It's harder to parse out of that baseline model is that there are a number of smaller projects that are mixed in there, but because those other projects are so large, it's hard to see those.
Thank you.
Carl, I've got a question. You just said when we replace the penstock, you're talking about Crystal Lake?
Yes, yeah.
Wasn't that part of the project when we rebuilt the hydro?
It began as part of the project and then we couldn't afford to do it. It was a very large piece of that project. So only the bottom 120 feet of the penstock was replaced. The rest, the other 4,500 feet of the penstock should be replaced at some time. It's still in good shape. We evaluated it and felt comfortable in not trying to, having to replace it during that project, but it's still almost 70 years old. So it will need to be replaced at some time.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted clarification on that. Questions on the electrical rate study? You go over the water, the wastewater and the electrical, it doesn't look like anything's going down. So there's gonna, it's kind of, yeah, I don't know what kind of a comment to make on that. For, you know, affordability for living in, I guess it's not just our community, but it's probably more widespread than that.
Yes, sir. I think speaking to Carl as well, we did do comparisons to make sure that our rates are comparable with other communities. And I have a few clients also in Alaska that are going for higher rate increases across the board, just trying to make sure they're strategic with it. Don't increase it more than you have to, and make sure it's affordable as the best they can, right? And with inflation rising, they have to increase. Otherwise, they're afraid of any big incidents taking place. That's what the real worry is, and a strain on their system. And oftentimes when they push, and this is working all of my clients, where if they push out some of the adjustments, it comes out higher than it is. If they push out projects, suddenly a project that was $1 million becomes $2 million in 2 years. And they're afraid of that, which is why they're planning to just increase it slowly. In this case, it's a 4% and a readjustment in how we do a simpler model. It's much better than waiting for like a 10 or 15%. Like I have a presentation coming up next week where it's 55% increases across the board.
Sounds good.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, does this wrap up the rate study presentation?
Yes, sir. For the most part, I think we have sanitation, but it's already it's not as built as the rest. It's essentially because we have, let's say, 3% scheduled for 26 and 27. This is what the graph tells us. I can break up into pieces, but I think everyone has seen enough today in terms of breaking down the pieces. But you can clearly see that for the most part, we're doing really well. There is no need to have dramatic increases in the near future. If we were to, let's say, have 3% again, roll forward for the foreseeable future, this is what it looks like. And it's a slight decline. That's because of some capital projects that might take place. But I think for now, it's no drastic action is needed besides the 3% that's already scheduled.
And through the mayor, it gives us a chance to get this CSWA study done and figure out what the impact's going to be on not just us, but all of Southeast. So when we get to sanitation, we're going to be pretty like non-committal, and we might need some rate increases, but we're not going to make them go crazy until we know exactly what the CSWA thing tells us, because it may change prices on everything, or it may help us out.
But there has been a rate study completed for sanitation as well?
Has it been completed? Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, maybe there'll be some good news. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Do
Well,
you have?
nothing else, sir. That's all I have for today.
Okay,
I did.
thank you for,
Yeah, thank you.
lot of information.
I know.
Thanks for your time today, Ari. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Take care, everyone. And you can feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or doubts that I can help clear up.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the offer.
Bye.
Okay, that brings us to the mayor's report. If I believe I'm in the right spot here. Very little on the mayor's report. Little Norway Festival 2025. It's beginning on May 12th through the 18th. Petersburg will be celebrating our Norwegian heritage with many community events. Thank you to the Public Works and Parks and Recreation for helping prepare for festivities. Wishing everyone a safe and enjoyable celebration. I thought I'd mention today too, the fishing season's right around the corner. I'll be here for the first meeting in June, but after that, it's just like usual up in the air. So, and I imagine another assembly member, a couple more assembly members are in the same scenario, so. Yeah, so that's my mayor's report. Manager, can you please give us your report?
Thank you, sir. First Bank has generously awarded the library a $3,000 grant to support the summer reading programs, continuing their tradition of being a valued funding partner for many years now. The library's online Petersburg newspaper archive now includes full-color PDFs of the Petersburg pilot from 2016 to 2023, thanks to the pilot for making this valuable resource freely available to all. The SEPA shutdown is scheduled for June 10th through 9th this year. Power and light customers are encouraged to plan for conservation of energy during the June billing period. The less power being used means less diesel burning and a lower overall fuel adjustment charge in July. Staff are preparing for the shutdown. New operators are getting weekly training sessions, and our mechanic is making sure all aspects of the engines are ready to go. Power and Light is making progress on the Scow Bay Generation Project. We hope to issue a purchase order for project switchgear soon, as well as an invitation to bid on the transformer. Power and Light continues to work with PIA regarding a Department of Energy grant that we received. And some good news in that the initial $271,000 of funding is available. The department will be proposing some projects to PIA's tribal council to use the funds on and moving forward as approvals from the tribe and the funding source are received. Crystal Lake is free of ice and its water level is on the rise. Hydro will be pushing out 2 megawatts or more for the foreseeable future so that we don't end up spilling as the snowpack melts. The GIS project to convert utility mapping to a geodatabase format is moving forward. Resource Data Inc. is a GIS support company has been hired by the borough to convert the existing map data to a new format and will be on the ground with the borough staff in June for 2 weeks to verify and collect infrastructure data so the mapping is as accurate as possible after the conversion. Spring maintenance in the harbor is in full swing. The harbor crew is asking that customers make sure they remove personal items from finger floats prior to departure from their stall, or harbor staff will clear the fingers in preparation for summer hot berthing. Launch permits are available at the harbor office. Available renewal is June 1st. Also, Middle and North Harbor parking permits are available at the harbor office. Reminder for dog owners that frequent the harbors, please keep dogs on leashes. We're getting numerous complaints about overly excited dogs jumping up on individuals and harassing pedestrians. Clean up after your dog. The harbor provides buckets on the floats for dog owners to wash up after their animals. Please use them. As spring arrives, the harbor department is noticing increased wake issues. Please report incidents immediately so the harbor staff can involve the PD to aid in ordinance enforcement. Remind to all permanent stall holders to update their lease agreements. The new ordinance requirements for vessels to leave the harbor for 24 hours during the calendar year is being monitored and will be enforced starting January 1st, 2026. Spring sand pickup continues. Our street washing has slowed down a bit due to problems with our wash truck. We are still using it on a limited basis, but instrumentation control issues have cropped up that require attention. We have a technician coming to town the weekend of May 9th through 10th to hopefully get this fixed and get our street washing program back on track. With Little Norway Festival coming up, we are starting our annual Spruce Up Downtown, cleaning garbage cans and hydrants and painting curbs and crosswalks as weather permits. We're also going to paint the new crosswalk at Sandy Beach Park for the Ravens Roost Trail Crossing. The online auctions for the surplus power and light trucks and the bucket truck have generated some interest, but only one unit has gotten bids to date. The auctions close on May 5th. Any units that don't sell will likely be relisted. Water staff inspected Cabin Creek Reservoir and working to remove the annual winter accumulation of logs near the spillway. And water production is going up as spring progresses. We're at about 900,000 gallons per day presently, which is about half of what we expect to see in mid to late summer as fish processing reaches its peak water consumption. We were able to get the water heater changed out at assisted living thanks to Absolute Drain. We're also working on the painting needs for assisted living building. The Volunteer Association held its annual, Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department Association held its annual Family Fun Day event on 4/27. It was well attended. Thank you to Hammer and Wecon, Petersburg IGA, and Coastal Bear for their donations to help make this event a success. And as always, thank you to the public for your support and the volunteers who helped run this event. Aaron Hankins met with airport officials and Officer Chief Kerr reviewing the airport emergency plans. The EMS and search and rescue branches will be conducting a joint drill with the harbor security boat on 5/21 at the South Harbor Boat Launch late in the evening. And Governor Dunleavy has proclaimed May 3rd through the 9th is Wildland Fire Prevention and Preparedness Week, and May 18th through the 24th EMS Week. We did have several promotions in the officer ranks. Congratulations to Matt Lichtenstein, EMS Lieutenant, Bjorn Stolpe, SR Search and Rescue Captain, and Alex Rodriguez Smith, Search and Rescue Lieutenant. And last but not least, we congratulate and thank Debbie Thompson for her many years of dedicated service to the former city and for the borough. Debbie will be greatly missed, but we are happy that she was able to relax closer to her family. Thanks for all that have been done for the borough departments and communities. All the best in retirement.
Are there any questions of the manager? Seeing none, shall we take a 10-minute break?
Great idea.
Okay. Well, we'll reconvene at, let's just say 1:45. I don't use this very much, but I might have to. I never used it. It's 17 years. Okay, back onto the Borough Assembly meeting. We're on item 14, unfinished business. First item there is an ordinance, it's 2025-03. This is an ordinance adjusting the fiscal year 2025 budget for known changes. This is the third and final reading. So I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its third and final reading.
Go move.
Second.
Motion been made by Member Lynn, seconded by Member Marsh. Any discussion? Just for a little bit of info that this ordinance was passed unanimously in the first two readings. So if there's no other discussion, will the clerk call the roll?
Member Schwartz,
Yes.
Mayor Jensen,
Yes.
Member Lynn,
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger,
Yes.
Member Newman,
Yes.
Member Valentine,
Yes.
Member Marsh.
Yes.
Okay, so that ordinance passes unanimously in its third and final reading. That brings us to the last item under unfinished business, and that's ordinance 2025-04. This is an ordinance amending chapter 19, zoning of the Petersburg Municipal Code to establish overlay zones within municipal zoning regulations and to create a marine industrial overlay zone. This is the third and final reading, and this ordinance was also passed unanimously in its first two readings. So I'd entertain a motion to approve this ordinance in its third reading.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Marsh, seconded by Member Valentine. Any discussion? Member Stanton Greger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to thank all of the staff that were part of putting this together. Know that I'm aware that it took a lot of work trying to get this dialed in at the Assembly's request, so thank you.
Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Member Stanton Greger,
Yes.
Member Lynn,
Yes.
Member Schwartz,
Yes.
Member Marsh,
Yes.
Member Valentine,
Yes.
Mayor Jensen.
Yes.
Member Newman.
Yes. Okay, ordinance 2025-04 passes unanimously in its third and final reading. That brings us to item 15 on today's agenda, and this is new business. First item under new business is ordinance 2025-05, an ordinance of the Petersburg Borough adopting the budget for the fiscal year July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. The Assembly will consider the first reading of this ordinance, which will set the borough budget. Copy of the budget is in the packet, and I'd like to remind people that there's 2 more readings, and the second reading will have a public hearing for the public to comment if necessary. So I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by member Stanton Greger and seconded by member Marsh. Discussion. Member Stanton Greger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks to Jody and Steve and the department heads for getting us a balanced budget for one. I'm glad you mentioned it, Mr. Mayor, of the next one is a public hearing. I've got a couple of amendments I was considering, but I'm going to leave them off the table here in this first reading to give the general public more time to chime in. Obviously, if anyone else has amendment ideas, I'll consider them, but I'll be curious to see what correspondence we get from the public and who, if anyone shows up to give us their 2 cents at the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. I agree with your position on that. Let the public weigh in and see what the public's concerns are. Any other discussion? Member Marsh.
So I highlighted quite a few things, which may, as we discuss further, resolve themselves. But one of the things that I noticed is that different departments there's line items for their utilities. So I'm wondering if Power and Light has the capability of narrowing down, pinpointing, say, what in this municipal building is used by the police department and what utilities are used specifically by the admin, the offices upstairs. I don't know if that's answerable. And Director Hagerman, I wonder if you might have.
How many meters are in the building, I guess?
Through the mayor, I believe there's one. So we do not have all the different department areas separated by meter.
So then when I see a utility, say for the police and jail at 17,500, but the finance doesn't have a utility.
Kind of speak to that if that's, so the police department and jail, they pay a percentage of the meter charges. I believe I want to say it's 33%. Then the remainder goes to non-departmental. It's on, I'll tell you what page, it's at the end of the general fund budget. And because you'll notice you don't see one for admin or assembly, anything like that as well. Yeah, and the reason why we break up for the jail and police is the state pays a portion of the jail contract, and included in that is utilities. And so we want to make sure that we allocate some expenses to that department.
Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Mayor Johnston.
Yes.
Member Marsh.
Yes.
Member Valentine.
Yes.
Member Schwartz.
Yes.
Member Lynn.
Yes.
Member Newman.
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger.
Yes.
Okay, the budget ordinance passes unanimously in its first reading. Next item under new business, it's a resolution 2025-09. This is a resolution adopting an updated local government model general administrative records retention and disposition schedule for the Petersburg Borough. The borough's current records retention schedule was adopted by the Petersburg City Council in 2002. If approved, this resolution will adopt an updated records retention and disposition schedule for the Petersburg Borough, which mirrors the state of Alaska schedule number 300.1. I'd entertain a motion to approve this change.
So move. Second.
Motion's been made by member Lynn, seconded by member Newman. Becky, maybe just a brief description of what we're doing here.
Yes, so the records retention schedule indicates for each type of record, like for example, workman's comp claims or insurance forms or personnel records, how long we need to keep each of those types of records before we can destroy. Some of them are forever. You have to keep minutes forever. We keep insurance records forever, workman's comp, 50 years. And looking at the old 2002 city records retention schedule, it wasn't quite as stringent as the state of Alaska's. For example, the workman's comp was 40 years instead of 50. So Debbie, before she left, spent a lot of time getting that records retention schedule merged together from the state. And so what we're doing is just going to have a more up-to-date schedule, and we'd appreciate adopting that, and this will cover all departments in the borough.
Thank you. So it's
Yes.
just a record keeping, bookkeeping, cleanup
Yes.
near the state, okay. Any discussion from assembly members? Clerk, call the roll.
Member Marsh?
Yes.
Member Schwartz?
Yes.
Member Newman?
Yes.
Member Valentine?
Yes.
Mayor Jensen?
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger?
Yes.
Member Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, so that proposal passes unanimously. Item C, under new business, American Cruise Lines lease application. American Cruise Lines has submitted an application to lease borough-owned tidelands southwest of parcel 1-008-220. A copy of the lease application is attached to this agenda. So if the assembly has to approve this lease moving forward, then it goes to the planning commission with a required public hearing and to the harbor board. And I believe, I don't know if they have a public hearing as well. And the lease would come back to the assembly after it goes through those two entities. So I'd entertain a motion to approve moving this lease application forward.
So moved.
Second. Motion been made by member Valentine, seconded by member Newman. Any discussion? Member Stanton Greger.
Yeah, just briefly, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'll gladly be voting yes to enter this into the part of the process. As you stated, it goes before planning and zone, or the planning commission with the required public hearing and the harbor board. So this first step in getting this application vetted. Thanks.
Okay, any other discussion? I was looking at, through this lease agreement, there's a few things that concern me about the proposed lease, but I'm just gonna wait and see what the harbor board and planning and zoning says. One of them is the borough, if we use it in the wintertime, then we're responsible for the maintenance, and that would concern me. But also in this lease application, I was under the assumption that all business property owners within 600 feet were going to be sent a copy of this lease agreement. And I don't see Piston and Rudder on here. I don't see Island Refrigeration, or I don't see people that own businesses on the airplane float, Petro Marine, Coast Guard, Forest Service, Rockies Marine, and then another Coast Guard entity. They have been noticed of this application. So do we think?
So
Clerk.
what I understand the process is it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Harbor Board. And then before it's presented, we notify everybody within 600 feet, adjacent property owners, that this will be on the agenda at that assembly meeting, whatever date that ends up being.
So the other property owners in that vicinity won't be notified until the assembly
I
sees
think
it
the
again?
Planning Commission process also, I don't think Liz is here, they also will
Okay,
notify.
during the planning.
Yeah,
Okay, I just wanted
that's
to make
another
sure
part of the
that
process.
everybody within the
They'll get several
circumference
notices.
there gets noticed. Any other discussion?
Just a
Member Lynn.
point, when both the Harbor Board and the Planning Commission take a look at it, there's points in there that really wish they'd take some consideration on, particularly leases and some of the lease time that they're requesting, and some of the other proposed points that the American Cruise Lines is proposing. Would be good to have their feedback on some of those items.
Okay, I agree. And one other thing that I just remembered I wanted to mention was we had that town hall meeting, talk about the tourism, and there was quite a few people in attendance. And one of the concerns that people had that I got out of that meeting was ownership of this by American Cruise Lines. So it doesn't seem like we're moving down the road at this point where it was going to be, we were going to be part owners in it. So we'll just see how it progresses. So I'm glad it's going to planning and zoning and the harbor board. If there is no other discussion, will the clerk call the roll? Japes, did you have a?
No,
some
I'm just,
input?
yeah, I was gonna say that, I think, this is a good lease since we as a borough couldn't figure out a way to figure out the money situation. And I think that, ACL has been good to the borough in transparency, and I think they're doing really good job about that transparency of what they're trying to do, how they're trying to work with us and moving forward. And, yeah, just making sure that this thing goes through without affecting the town so heavily with like one of the things they said in here, don't let the bigger, large vessels over 250 come dock there and so on. And once planning and zoning and then harbor comes in, that'll be really nice to get their feedback and so that we can continue moving this forward. So thank you.
Okay, any other input? Member Newman?
Yeah, I guess I just have never really heard this is kind of comes as a surprise to me because I thought that the ACL was working with the administration to come up with the plan to come up with the money. And the conversations I had with the harbor master, there were, some really good ideas. So I think that everybody needs to hear kind of what happened in those meetings. I wasn't a part of those meetings. And how we arrived where we are now, where they decided to forego working with the borough collaboratively, which would have given us a relative amount of control over how much tourism we would have in the future, which is, kind of our seat at the table, essentially, that we are now giving up because we didn't come up with a plan. So I don't know if it's too late to go back and revisit that, or I would like to hear from people how we arrived at where we're at.
Well, in my recollection from being involved a little bit in this was money. Like you said, we were gonna take money out of different departments to do utilities, et cetera, from the Harbor Enterprise Fund, and then we were still X amount of dollars short. And I think American Cruise Lines, if I'm not right, they just decided to go this direction. So Manager Giesbrecht?
Yeah, I'll jump in and then Glow if you can. So we had a meeting with them and I thought it went very, very well. We discussed, we laid it on the table. The borough had a source potentially of $1 million. We needed $1.7 million. American Cruise Lines offered to pay the other $700,000. So they were actually pretty easy to work with. And we both parties, the borough as well as American Cruise Lines, had some work to do, and we agreed to get back together again. Our attorney was on the call as well and was working on stuff. And next thing you know, we get a letter from them saying they've changed their mind, they're gonna go it on their own. I don't know why. Glow, I don't know if you can add, I think you had a conversation with them, but.
Yeah, I think it came down to just recognizing the fact that we didn't really have a good game plan financially. And we haven't really been given the tools to really negotiate a, financial package. And so, they're serious. They want to come tie up, starting in 2027. And it's just, it's been months of this. So I think that's where it came to. I'm not saying that they might still be open if there's, energy to do that. But at this point, there's a long way from I just said maybe the harbor could, pitch in a little to keep us a seat at the table. There's a lot of difference from that to completing it. And there are some considerations that need to be taken in if this is a public project versus a private project. And so what are those numbers, that magic number where it becomes all or nothing? And that's going to take more time. And if we were given the tool, I don't know the direction that, you all want to take. Turn the manager loose to negotiate and to come up. We don't have the 2.7 needed to do the entire project readily through the harbor. And our other option was using it at Economic Development Fund project. And those monies have been committed to Scow Bay. And those numbers are, we're waiting for the word from the federal administration that we're going to get that $9 million to do that project and potentially freeing up some interest money off of our fund to go after another economic development project. So I guess, through Steve, which direction you want to go. They want to get going here and do this. And so I think after our last meeting, they could recognize that it was too big of a jump for the borough to come up with all the funds needed to get this across the finish line.
That's why we're at where we're at today, I think, in my opinion, was the money. We never did discuss that, but basically just gave the manager permission to negotiate with him. So anyway, Member Newman.
Yeah, the one resounding thing I remember at the town hall was, a lot of people were really for, but I feel like the general consensus was everybody was for tourism. But one of the biggest things that really did come across in my mind was we don't want to be, Juneau, Ketchikan. We want to have control over the amount of tourism that comes into our community. And so, they weren't against it, but at the same time, we don't want to lose control. And this in-holding basically is what it's going to be. By going through this permitting process, we're giving up any relative amount of control that we would have had. And so I still am very much in full support of advocating or giving the manager the ability to negotiate. Maybe we do it in a more creative fashion so that we can come up with the revenue to do this, because, the community has spoken. They don't want to lose control of tourism. And by not moving forward with negotiating directly with them, we're giving up our ability to have a seat at the table. So, yeah, I'm going to vote for this, but I really wish that we would reconsider how we approach this.
Well, we have some time. I don't know how long the process takes to go through planning and zoning and the harbor board and then back to us, but that would be a whole other action item we'd have to put on the agenda to vote.
Well, why can't we give the green light to the manager to move forward with negotiating and then continue on with this? We can do both, can't we?
I feel that hasn't been advertised, so I don't think that's an action item we should give the manager personally, but if.
But it has been advertised. We've been working on it.
They've talked a lot, and there was one thing that at the end. Oh. Then, a lot of it came down to, the city manager was talking to them a lot, so was Glow and all those other town meetings, but I think it came down from that 2.7 down to 1. If we could figure out where to get 1 million. And then that's kind of where it ended up kind of being held, and we were just trying to figure out where we can get the funds. And then with everything going on everywhere else, economic being held up, harbor kind of being willing, but then would like other departments, that's where everything kind of came to a roadblock. And for these guys here, they're at this point kind of working on speed, right? So 2027's coming and it's going to take a little bit. And that's where I think the lease is coming in, where they're still trying to be good for the borough by being like, hey, we could still use it, so on. It's just when they're there, they definitely don't want anybody else there. And I think that was part of whatever agreement we would have had with them anyways. So yeah, I think that's where this was coming from.
Okay, 1 minute. I think the discussion on the table right now should remain the application for a lease by American Cruise Lines. Member Stan Gregor.
Yeah, actually, just going to clarify that point from a procedural standpoint. I think Robert's rules would agree with you. Transferring from a lease to a purchase agreement would be consistent with what you're saying, wasn't advertised as a potentiality. So to your point, Member Newman, that doesn't preclude you from having that as an action item on the next meeting. My 2 cents from a parliamentary procedure standpoint.
Member Marsh.
I am in concept, I like the idea, but I have some heartburn with the seat at the table phrase. This is our table. This is Petersburg. I mean, I feel like that we are the guests to American Cruise Lines in this discussion. And that somewhat frustrates me because this is our table. And if we don't like it and we're worried about losing control, which the public has been very generous with their input, I think we stand to lose control. Another thing I have is that if down the road, so if we grant a 50-year lease, but say in 20 years, they decide that they really don't want to do it. So they sell it to, instead of it being ACL, it's XYZ company, cruise company, but they want to bring in their bigger boats. And then we're back here at square one. Step one, do we, how do we want to restrict the passenger impact? So I think that some questions definitely need to be answered, but I think we need to not forget that this is our table. And this is our town. So if it's down to a dollar amount, which it seems to be, there's not a real definitive answer on the why that we ended up where we are, which I think would be beneficial to figure out.
Yeah, I think we kind of discussed it a little bit in our conversation here, but, it did come down to 1.7 million. We potentially discussed $1 million. And they said they'd pay the other 700,000. That's when they came back. So we were working on that, and then we come back with they're applying for a lease. So that was the chain of events, is the way I understood it. So if there's no more discussion on the American Cruise Lines lease application, clerk call the roll.
Member Valentine?
Yes.
Member Newman?
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger?
Yes.
Member Lynn?
Yes.
Member Schwartz?
Yes.
Member Marsh? Mayor Jensen?
Yes. Okay, next item under new business is Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department Association request for a lighted sign. The Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department requests permission to install at their expense a lighted sign in front of the fire department. The sign will provide notice to the community about department events and will be used to recruit new volunteers. Entertain a motion to approve this request.
I'll move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Marsh, seconded by Member Valentine. Any discussion? Member Marsh?
Yes. I wonder if we could have a history of how this came to be, because this photo looks like we have a sign ready to be installed. So I wonder if we might have some discussion on that. Thank you.
The vice president of the association's coming to join us as well. So I'll start and he can fill in any gaps. So shortly before the meeting, I also received a request from Assemblymember Marsh to give a quick primer on what the association is, and then I will answer that second question if that's okay. So chapter 3.32.090 gives the members of the volunteer fire department the permission to organize into an association or club. It started off as a club. As rules around nonprofits got more stringent, they became a 501c3. It operates as a completely separate entity from anything in my control as a department head. They have a series of funding sources, mostly through donations through the community. They also have a gaming permit that allows them to do raffles and pull tabs. And then there is some large restricted funds that have been donated to them, such as the Smoky Hell Fund, which was, the pilot did an article on it, but it was a memorial fund to aid with additional search and rescue operations. They use this fund to fund their own activities and equipment purchases outside of what the borough can fund. So some of those purchases include the restoration of the 3 antique vehicles that the borough has, the container prop that's out at Scow Bay, the ballistic vest used to aid the police department should they need to, information kiosks at Sandy Beach, Fruit for Kids, the Learn Not to Burn Week, the Family Fun Day that was spoken about earlier, bike helmets to hand out to the community,
They also use it to fund other safety projects such as, I think they helped install crash bars at the local Head Start community, provided ice safety and rescue training to the Kinderskog folks and provided them with some radios for their operations. They also use it to purchase equipment for themselves, such as department uniforms and coats, and sends volunteers to other training above and beyond what the department can fund. It's made up of 4 officers, president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. Joe Bertinoli here is our vice president. How they procure things is they have a purchase request form that gets filled out by a member that has a project that they like to bring forward to the association. That person becomes a project lead on that request. It gets voted on by the general membership at the association meetings once a month. And then their spending policies that govern how they go forth and spend that money. In the case of the sign, it was a project that was presented by a member of the department. It was approved. I was not there at this meeting. I had a death in the family I was attending to. They voted to approve the sign, and then they didn't speak about it for a while. They didn't hear anything about it. The member came to me at one point and asked if the sign had been ordered, and my response was, "What sign?" After he explained the project to me, I let him know that, hey, this is borough property. We need to sit down and figure out where you're gonna put the sign, what's gonna look like, and get all that approved before you buy it. And then I didn't see him for a little bit because he was out of town and came back and parts started showing up. And going, he violated internal policies to the association, of which that's being dealt with in-house, and they're trying to play catch-up now to get the permission from the borough in order to install this sign. The idea behind it and the information provided to you is that they can use it to help with public messaging and a slew of other things. But after getting their hands slapped, they're trying to do it correctly now. So that's why there's a big hole in the ground. This individual started talking to individual vendors before he realized that he needed permission from not just me, but from the manager and from the assembly. I was able to finally get that paused after playing the cat and mouse game of which vendors he talked to, not knowing because he wrote nothing down. The plans that you see before you, I had to draft based on a conversation with him. And that's how we got to where we're at today. Joe, do you have anything to add? So.
First off, a sign came to me. Yeah, in my opinion. Any other assembly members want to hear other input? Thank you for your input. And any other discussion?
I think we've probably all been guilty of overzealousness a time or two. So I appreciate the efforts of the Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department and their efforts. It sounds, I was unaware of how in-depth they have gone and covered bases and created opportunities and benefits to many groups in town. So I appreciate that, but I also appreciate going through the proper channels.
Member Newman.
I would just like to say I was a volunteer fireman once many, many years ago, and it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot, and I think that we all should be glad that we have a very passionate volunteer fire department.
Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Bertinoli? Or, huh?
Sign it as we're gonna, this is Joe Bertignoli anyhow, and I'm the vice president of the association. The only thing, when I got involved with it, because of all this he said before, wasn't me, but was to I talked to DOT, the right-of-way guy, and asking him for distance we had to be from the right-of-way to put this sign and follow the same regulations that they did with the high school sign, or actually the theater sign, and that it can't be flashing, it can't be animated, it can't be scrolling. You can change the words in that there, but it can't be like a constant scrolling thing. So those rules will be adhered to with this sign too. So whoever's programming it and what we're doing it, it will follow what DOT wants us to see with that sign. So, and it's not that big, it's gonna be ground level, and you can see it on the map in front of you or whatever.
Great,
picture.
yeah, I've read it
Yeah.
looks like the proper channels were
They
gone through in that
were.
respect for location and permitting, yeah.
Right, and so those bases have been covered also, so I just want to throw that in there, so.
Any other discussion? Clerk call the roll.
Member Lynn?
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger?
Yes.
Mayor Jensen? Member Newman?
Yes.
Member Marsh?
Yes.
Member Schwartz?
Yes.
Member Valentine?
Yes.
Okay, and we've already had the item E under new business, the wastewater rate study. Brings us to communications. There are communications listed in today's agenda that we've received since April 17th, 2025. They're available for the community's viewing if they go on our website. That brings us to item 17, assembly discussion items, assembly member comments. Any members have comments today? Seeing none. Recognitions. Member Stanton Greger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to briefly recognize eighth grade and middle school math teacher Rick Brock for his many years of teaching. He's announced he's going to be retiring at the end of the year. So thank you, Rick, for teaching so many generations of students. And on a personal note, I want to put a hope out there that you will choose to continue coaching and that my son can have you as a coach someday. I hope you stick with that part of the job. Thank you again, Rick.
Member Valentine.
Kind of following that as well, this is the end of the year, and I'd like to thank, as the school year is ending too, thank all the people that working at the school and thank all the coaches and especially all the ones that are recently stepping up with Little League, which coaches are hard to come by, and so just thanks everybody for doing what they do. Thanks.
Member Marsh.
Yes, I would like to give a shout out to Director Tao and all the department heads for their very detailed budget presentation and line items and clarifications and all that. Thank you.
Any other recognitions? Okay, we have an executive session planned and potential action after that. So we need a motion to recess into executive session to discuss with members of the borough negotiating team the status of the wage negotiations and the labor agreement between the borough and IBEW, including the parties' proposals. So entertain a motion to go into executive session. Second. Clerk, call the roll.
Member Marsh?
Yes.
Member Valentine?
Yes.
Member Stanton Greger? Mayor Jensen?
Yes.
Member Lynn?
Yes.
Member Schwartz? Member Newman?
Yes.
Okay, we'll give a couple minutes for everybody to vacate the room that's not supposed to stay, and then we'll go into executive session.